All right, guys, we've now completed all of our positional rankings, so now it's time to bring it all together in a rookie mock draft. This is where the fun of the offseason begins, so I hope you enjoy. Like the video, subscribe, comment down below what do you think of this mock draft, and let's cue that intro. Welcome back to Twin Takes Fantasy Football. And now we have all of our individual positioning rankings for quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs. Let's see how they all stack up in comparison. Where should they be going in a mock draft? What rounds should be targeting what guys? And bringing it all together for this rookie mock draft. Today we're going to be doing SuperFlex because that's one of the more preferred methods of Dynasty. We'll also be doing a one quarterback mock draft for rookies next week, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, I really want to get in front of the SuperFlex because we just have a ton of quarterbacks to talk about and a ton of landing spots. You know, who's the first quarterback off your board? How does they rank in comparison to the other positions when the quarterbacks are so highly valued in a 2 QB setting? And also, I want you to know that this mock draft isn't going to entirely align strictly based on my rankings. Yes, there are some guys that I would take higher than others based on my personal rankings, but this rookie mock draft is going to take in an amalgamation of my personal rankings as well as the consensus rankings. So even if based on my rankings, I have Roschon based over Zach Charbonnet, but I'm not going to recommend you take Roschon at the beginning of the second round. If you really, like me, value Roschon over Charbonnet, you're going to trade down and look for another landing spot for him. So, trying to give you an idea of where I think, is the appropriate place to take these guys in comparison to consensus rankings. So, with all those disclaimers out of the way, let's break into this mock draft. Let's go ahead and, we don't want to start. First one here, it's just going to be Bijan. I mean, who else would it be? The most sought-after prospect in Dynasty Fantasy Football since Saquon Barkley. I mean, this guy has been the fantasy football darling for many, many years. I have had 2 videos about him being the RB1, basically the number 1 overall prospect in fantasy football. We really don't need to talk about this too much longer. This is where it's actually going to get really, really fun. So my first quarterback that I have off the board is going to be Anthony Richardson. I just think that based on the upside, even in a SuperFlex league, I understand you value quarterbacks differently in a SuperFlex league. Because you have 2 startable assets for the quarterback position, the emphasis is on having more consistent production from the quarterback position, and he's not really taking those upside swings. So I understand in one quarterback drafts, Anthony Richardson is the consensus number 1. In Superflex, Bryce Young, given his day 1 starting ability, how good he's looked so far through rookie camps, and then just like the known floor you get with Bryce Young, it's going to be hard not to waste your 102 pick on him. But for me personally, I can't ignore the upside of Anthony Richardson, his landing spot in the Indianapolis Colts with Shane Steichen developing him, his elite ability as a running back, or as a running quarterback to get you those fantasy points on the ground, which is a cheat code for fantasy. Anthony Richardson is my guy here at the 102. Moving on to the 103, we just mentioned his name. It's going to be Bryce Young. Like I said, has the highest floor of any of these quarterback prospects. And getting Bryce Young here at the 103, I think is a very, very solid pick. I know there's a lot of draft risers coming in on Jahmyr Gibbs and Jackson Smith and Jigba, but in a SuperFlex league, the quarterbacks are just so insanely valuable that Bryce Young can't go below 103 for me. Moving on to 104, this is going to be a very interesting pick because the debate is Jahmyr Gibbs over Jackson Smith and Jigba. The running back 2 in this class versus the wide receiver 1. For me personally, I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs here at the 104 over Jackson Smith and Jigba. And the reason is because Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have a much more immediate value throughout this season. If you value Jackson Smith and Jigba over Jahmyr Gibbs and you really, really want him, you can trade Jahmyr Gibbs for Jackson Smith and Jigba plus. It's about knowing your league and knowing the value of these players. And Jahmyr Gibbs being the 12th overall pick to Detroit, he will come out and immediately have production, immediately be very involved in this offense, even through the first 6 weeks with Jamison Williams suspension. So Jahmyr Gibbs' immediate value is going to be much, much higher than Jackson Smith and Jigba, as Smith and Jigba has Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Kenneth Walker, and Zach Charbonnet to compete with as far as target share in that offense. So I think as far as evaluating value appropriately, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have the most immediate value, and then you can probably flip him for JSN plus once those values have sorted themselves out. And at 105, I'm going to continue to stay away from CJ Stroud. Jackson Smith-Njigba here is my pick at the 106. Yes, I know I have Jordan Addison ranked above him in my wide receiver position rankings, but just again, this is knowing your league, knowing the consensus values. If you, like me, want Jordan Addison, I would, try to do a pick swap with Team 6, with Team 7, get a little bit lower down the board, get some more capital, and still get your guy. Overall, Jackson Smith-Njigba, just the talent that he is coming out of Ohio State, super highly touted prospect, but again, that immediate on-field production is going to be a little bit limited. Yes, I know he's going to slot right into the slot position for the Seattle Seahawks, but he's competing with a dominant run game that Pete Carroll likes to use, and now he has Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. He's competing with DK Metcalf, who's the undisputed wide receiver one of that offense, and Tyler Lockett is still there as a productive wide receiver. So Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to go here, and then this is where we'll stop the fall of CJ Stroud. Again, I just can't really buy into CJ Stroud. I voiced my concerns about him many, many times over in both the pre-draft and post-draft rankings of my quarterbacks. I know a lot of people want to look at the Georgia game, want to look at his pre-draft process and think, wow, this is such an amazing quarterback prospect. But again, as someone who evaluates the entirety of the season, he had some pretty palpable concerns throughout the entirety of his college football season. Also, I really don't like the landing spot for the Houston Texans. I went into this draft saying whichever quarterback goes to the Texans is going to fall down my board. And I didn't think it was possible for the landing spot to get worse during the draft, but it did, because the head office and the GM of the Texans traded away their they traded away their first round pick next year to come back up and get Will Anderson. DeMeco Ryans, as much as I like him as a head coach, I thought that was an amazing hire by the Texans, but his focus is going to be especially on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think it's going to be, the same situation, the same environment to properly develop a quarterback like there is in Indianapolis for Anthony Richardson or there is in Carolina for Bryce Young, I think. And then also wasting your first round pick next year, you could have held on to it, maybe try to get a Marvin Harrison Jr. for CJ Stroud. But again, the weapons, I just don't think is going to be all that well incorporated into the Texans offense to make CJ Stroud that successful. Again, quarterback valuable in a super flex, but he's a guy that, he does fall out of the top 5 for me. And if, again, you're sitting at the 104 and someone wants to come up for CJ Stroud, I would be shopping that pick heavily because I think there's better value with some of these other skill position players. So at 107, should be no surprise to anyone here that I'm going to go with Jordan Addison over Quentin Johnston. Again, I think he is a better talent than Quentin Johnston. Yes, he has the size concerns, but as far as, when it comes to being a wide receiver, better route running, better hands, better football IQ, and then he just goes to a better situation. Yes, he's never going to be the wide receiver one when he's next to Justin Jefferson, but you don't need to be the wide receiver one. We've seen wide receiver twos be productive in this Minnesota Vikings offense. Kevin O'Connell is a very offensive mind coming from the Sean McVay system. I think he'll do plenty to get Jordan Addison the ball, and Jordan Addison as the wide receiver 2 will be much more productive than some wide receiver 1s. Think like a Devonta Smith or a Jalen Waddle this year. Obviously, wide receiver 2 on their team, but you'd rather take them over a Treylon Burks type of player. So moving on to the 108. This is really where draft capital comes into play. And these next 2 selections, really, I made the mistake last year of not valuing Jahan Dotson because of his landing spot with the Washington Commanders. So we're going to go with Quentin Johnston. There's something to be said with first round draft capital. I know as much as you might like or dislike a player, I know I'm a little bit lower on Quentin Johnston than most of the consensus out there. I think I've said this before. He's an athlete that plays wide receiver, not an athletic wide receiver. I think there's a lot that he has to work on and develop to be an effective pass catcher in the NFL. However, with such a high capital investment by the Chargers offense and by the Chargers front office, he's a guy that's going to have a ton of opportunity. And then just the hit rate when it comes to fantasy of first round guys is just exponentially higher than any other draft capital that's aligned to maybe a day two quarterbacks, day 2 running backs, even some of the tight ends here. So I'm just going to go off of hit rates and draft capital. Quentin Johnston, and a guy that I'm even lower on, Zay Flowers. I think, the 108, 109, 110 section is a really iffy section because after the 107, in my opinion, you have a huge tier fall off. Those top 7 guys all the way up to Addison, great players, immediate, palpable impact to your fantasy teams. After this, I think hit rate for, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, Kincaid, Charbonnet, Miller, some of these top these outside the first round running backs, the day 2 wide receivers, it just gets a little murky to me. So I'd be trying to trade out of this situation if I possibly can. But if you're stuck here, you're going to have to go with, what history says. I've been on record saying that I'm a guy that doesn't like to bet on outliers, and I'm not going to bet on a day 2 wide receiver jumping a day 1 wide receiver, or a round 3 running back jumping round 1 wide receiver. So Zay Flowers here, I think, with Todd Monken, it's going to be a really revolutionized Ravens offense. Odell Beckham Jr. is only there for 1 year. Rashad Bateman has proven he can't be the one. And I think there's going to be a really good connection between Lamar Jackson. He's going to be there for the next 5 years. He signed that extension. So Zay Flowers as the wide receiver 1. Again, the draft capital investment is huge here by the Ravens. And so he is the 109 pretty clearly in my mind. Moving on, at the 110, we'll be picking our first tight end of this draft. And that's going to be Dalton Kincaid. And again, I'm going to get a little against my rankings here. I personally prefer Mayer. I like the situation with him, with Jimmy Garoppolo, who's been pretty on record, has a major history of throwing to his tight ends. But again, it's very, very rare for the tight end to get round 1 capital, and that's what the Buffalo Bills with Dalton Kincaid. They also traded up for him, so it's not like, you can make the argument with Jordan Addison. The Minnesota Vikings didn't really want them. They were on the clock until the very last second. They were trying to trade back. They were trying to trade out. No. The Buffalo Bills traded up to get Dalton Kincaid. They clearly have a plan for him. They clearly want him in this offense. They didn't take another wide receiver until round 4 or 5, which was Justin Shorter. I don't think he's going to really even make the team. He'll be a practice squad player, if you had to ask my opinion. So Dalton Kincaid, we know the consistency with Gabe Davis isn't there. I think he can slot in really well. It might take him a little bit to develop. We know in Dynasty, tight ends don't really develop year 1. But as a secondary pass catching option in Buffalo to Stephon Diggs, I do like what Dalton Kincaid can provide, and I will take the bet on him here at the 110. If nothing, just for consensus value alone. And if you want to trade out of it, or if you can draft Dalton Kincaid here, I'm sure later on you can get pretty decent value out of him just because, draft capital sticks. Look at Kyle Pitts. You can still get multiple first rounders for Kyle Pitts, even though he's put up a pretty abysmal season last year. Just round 1 tight ends don't come along every once in a while. And it's something that is going to be valued, even overvalued in your dynasty leagues. So let's move on to the 111. And here I'm going to go with Zach Charbonnet. This has been really difficult for me to kind of figure out where Zach Charbonnet goes. You have this guy who's an immense talent, a guy that, in the right landing spot, if he had landed with the Chargers, high draft capital to the Chargers, high draft capital to the Bengals. This is a guy you could be looking up at, the 107 above Jordan Addison, but he goes to a really, really crowded backfield in the Seattle Seahawks and a room that has a lot of crowded skill position players as well, with the 3 wide receivers we mentioned earlier when talking about Jackson Smith and Jigba. But as far as an outlier in this class, a good outlier, that's going to be Zach Charbonnet. Again, he's 6'1", 215 pounds, one of the bigger backs in this class, and really has a skill set that not many other backs in this wide receiver or in this draft class have. He did have round 2 capital, the only running back to have round 2 capital, so we can't really ignore that. Plus, we've seen 2 back sets work pretty well in the NFL before. We've seen the Browns come out and have pretty productive, not this past season, but 2 seasons ago. Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are both pretty fantasy relevant, and with someone who leans as heavily into the run game as Pete Carroll does, I think Zach Charbonnet is worth the risk here. Again, just an uber talented player, and while the situation may not pan out well right now for him, again, sharing time with Kenneth Walker. I think if there's an injury to Kenneth Walker, if something happens to one of the wide receivers and you see that timeshare and that opportunity tick up for Zach Charbonnet, his value is going to go up. A guy you can probably get off of and flip into some very, very good capital, or flip for really good assets midway down the season. I'm just going to go and bet on the talent of the player here with Zach Charbonnet, even though I really, really dislike the landing spot. Number 12, we're going to go with another running back. It's going to be Kendre Miller. I know Devon Achane, a lot of people are super high on him. A lot of people love the explosivity of Devon Achane, but I'm going to prefer Kendre Miller. Again, he was ranked higher than Devon Achane in my pre and post draft rankings. So I believe as a running back, just talent alone, Kendre Miller is more talented. He also goes to a better situation. Again, we're looking at a backfield in the Saints with Alvin Kamara, who's going to get some sort of suspension at some time this season. And there's actually been rumors that, once that suspension comes down, they can move off from Alvin Kamara entirely because of the NFLPA regulations. All contracts are set with immediate act clause termination based on any charges or legal issues or legal sanctions. So based on Alvin Kamara's age, based on his lack of productivity last year, if they are given that out, the Saints are in a pretty ballooned contract for Alvin Kamara, they can move on from him sooner rather than later, and then Kendre Miller's value is going to skyrocket. And I think his path to the field and his utilization is going to be higher in the Saints offense compared to, the Miami offense with Devon Achane. But we'll talk a little bit more about Devon when we get to him. Moving on to the 201 here. Going to go with, again, when you're stuck in this position where it's like the late first round, early second round, these are high value picks. These are picks that you really, really don't want to miss on. You don't want to take shots on guys that, I see are a little bit more unreliable path to the field or unreliable path to fantasy success. So here it's going to be Michael Mayer, one of, I think, the safest players for fantasy and safest prospects in the draft. I mean, coming in to this year before his, pre-draft fall, which I still don't entirely agree with. I think it was just a whole issue of prospect fatigue where Michael Mayer has been such this dominant tight end force for the past 2 years. People just got tired of talking about him and just started to nitpick him and look for things because we've seen the good from Michael Mayer so much. I think going to the Las Vegas Raiders, who have moved on from Darren Waller and Foster Moreau. Congrats to Foster Moreau for signing that contract with the Saints, so that's really good for him. I know the Raiders signed Austin Hooper, but Austin Hooper has been basically this nomadic tight end who's put up 200 to 300 yards per year. I don't think he's going to find any sort of relevancy that he had 3 years ago with the Falcons. Michael Mayer should come in and have a pretty solid impact with the Raiders, with the quarterback and Jimmy Garoppolo, who likes to utilize the tight end, and I think his ability to block as well as pass catch is going to see him be out in the field for, upwards of 70% of snaps a game. It's going to give him a lot of opportunity, maybe even a little bit more so than Dalton Kincaid. So right here at the 201, that's what I'm going to go with and take that shot. Not really take a shot, but, I'm going to lean into the safety of Michael Mayer over some of these next few prospects. And we're going to go back to the quarterback well for the 202. And we're going to go with Will Levis. Now, again, this is where you have to know your league, know the consensus ranking, and know the market values of players. I've already went over my discussion between Hendon Hooker and Will Levis and why I think they are basically neck and neck. They're basically the same prospect to me, and I slightly value Hendon Hooker over Will Levis. That's all been broken down in the post-draft rankings. However, if you look at the market value of Will Levis, it's significantly higher than Hendon Hooker. So you're not going to go against and take this massive reach on a Hendon Hooker when you can take the 202, turn into Will Levis, and you can probably, squeeze some value out of it later on down the line. Just knowing what other people value these players as. So after this, I do think there's going to be quite a bit of inconsistency when it comes to wide receivers, when it comes to running backs. These are, players that as we get into later on in the second round, it's like 40-30% chance of hitting just based on draft capital and investment when it comes to historically ranking dynasty prospects. So when you come to guys that have a hit rate of 40% or less and it's a super flex, I am willing to take the risk on a highly drafted quarterback like Will Levis. As much as I don't know his success and I don't believe in the system and people in place in Tennessee, because frankly, the way they treat Malik Willis has left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth. Maybe Will Levis is different, but again, you have to see the round 2 draft capital as well as the market value here. And then again, just the value of quarterbacks in a super flex league. So this is where I kind of end my, first tier of like, these are really dynasty impactful players. Everything from here on out is going to follow a bit more of my personal rankings just because they're really all just shots. Most of these late round 2 picks, I know people like, oh, you can find value, try to find these sleepers. Very, very rarely do you find the sleepers. So if you like a lot of guys in this area, try to, trade down, trade for multiple picks. increase your chance of hitting on a guy by just throwing as many darts as possible, but these are guys that are genuinely just dart throws. So moving on to the 202, and this is going to be Devon Achane. I just don't think he's going to have the consistency. He'll be in a very explosive offense in Miami under Mike McDaniels, but he's also competing with Tyreek Hill. He's also competing with Jalen Waddle. Then you have Jeff Wilson or Raheem Mostert, who were very productive backs for the Miami Dolphins as well. Don't get me wrong, there's going to be some blow-up games for Devon Achane. He's been termed a best ball darling because, you're never going to know when to play him. He's going to have some games where he breaks off a 50-yard TD run. He's going to go up 20 points. And then the next game, he might have 4 touches for 21 yards. Again, a very volatile asset. A guy that I'm not personally picking up in my drafts based on that volatility. I don't think it's, key to winning success. And when it comes down to crunch time later on in the season, when you're fighting for playoff spots, when every game matters, when it's a one-round elimination, you need guys you can throw in there and consistently rely on their value. Devon Achane, I think, just based on name value alone, coming out of Texas A&M, out of a very prolific college career, and to this very, hyped-up landing spot in Miami Dolphins, I would take him here and try to see if you can move him for value later on. I know I've been saying that for a lot of these guys here, but it's just honestly the way I value putting some of these guys that I have lower in my rankings above guys that I have ranked higher. It's how I value putting Devon Achane above Roschon Johnson. It's how I value putting a Zay Flowers above a Jalen Hyatt, or not Zay Flowers, but, how I value putting Michael Mayer over a Dalton Kincaid. It's, again, trying to balance out where do we see this market value of these players and where you should be taking them based on what the market says. And if you aren't sold on them in this range, I should say that I'm okay with taking Devon Achane here. If you're stuck at the 203, this is the guy I would take. Maybe if there's a guy that you really, really love, if you really are in love with Roschon Johnson like I am, sure, try to. If there's no opportunity to trade out, then you can take a Roschon here. But with Devon Achane, I think the upside here is worth taking a bet on at 203. Here at the 204, where it's going to have a little bit of, we've taken a break from the wide receivers. We're going to go back to the wide receiver pool now, and it's going to be Jonathan Mingo, a guy that, I wasn't as high on coming into draft season, but guess what? Draft capital proved us all wrong. He's going to a great situation in Carolina where, there's not a lot of weapons. Terrace Marshall has not showed himself to be a reliable wide receiver. Adam Thielen is on the wrong side of 30. Jonathan Mingo is going to come in, going to be, rookie buddies. It's kind of a weird narrative to look at, when you talk about, okay, these rookies came in at the same rate together. They came in together. They might grow and develop. But listen, Bryce Young, great quarterback, high floor. Jonathan Mingo, high second-round draft capital, going to a very, very wide open area, wide open wide receiver room in the Carolina Panthers. I think he's a very, very worthy second-round pick. 204, honestly, is a steal. He is honestly a guy that I might take above Devon Achane as well. Moving on, we're going to go back to the running back pool, and this is where we're going to find Roschon Johnson here. Again, I know I'm much higher than consensus on him, but I just think his path to the field is incredible. I think he's just an amazing talent. Again, his public perception was definitely stymied by being behind Bijan Robinson, but he's going to go to a place where they got rid of David Montgomery. There's no other significant investment. They didn't extend Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert has been a career backup, and I don't think has really the chops to be that full-time number one back. Roschon Johnson, I think, is going to kind of come into this backfield, quickly take over, and really benefit from a highly run-focused offense. Roschon Johnson is going to be over a lot of other running backs that other people like, but 205, mid-second round for Roschon, not a reach. Definitely not a reach. He's an incredible talent. Moving on, sticking to the running back pool is going to be Tajay Spears. I just think when it comes to, these day two wide receivers versus the day two running backs, I think the certainty around the running backs is a lot more than the certainty around the wide receivers. There was a huge shakeup as far as rankings goes. Some of the guys that we thought were going to go in round 2 fell to round 3. A lot of the guys that maybe weren't as highly ranked, like a Jalen Reed, jump up to day 2. So I'm going to be more in line with, we evaluated these running backs. This is what we thought their talent was. Their talent aligned with where they were drafted. It seems like, our evaluations, the talent we saw on the field, what the NFL teams thought, it's all coming into consensus. So I like the safety a little bit more of these running backs. So I'll be taking Tajay Spears to the Tennessee Titans. Again, this guy could look like an absolute steal come next year when the Titans inevitably move on from Derrick Henry. If they don't move on from him this offseason or maybe midway through the season, they're definitely going to move on from him after this season as they kind of try to build up this roster again. They're haven't committed to the rebuild, but they're committing to the retool. And third round draft capital committed to Tajay Spears is a heck of a lot of draft capital to commit to a running back. Even with the knee injury stuff, I'm not as concerned. Again, these guys are professionals. They have medical teams doing evaluations, and I don't think the Titans would have taken him in round 3 if there was actually serious concerns around his knee injury and his cartilage. But who do we know? The Titans are pretty bad at evaluating injury. Just look at Caleb Farley from 2 years ago. The only thing is I'm going to throw in my personal anecdote of the fact that I have basically a similar thing where I have no cartilage in my knee, and the stuff that he does on the field, I could never do without going down in immense pain. So makes me believe that it's not as bad as what they were reporting. So moving on after Tajay Spears, I'm going to shake it up a little bit. I'm going to go with Rashee Rice here. Going to take him over a Jaden Reed, over a Josh Downs, over a Marvin Mims. It's the Kansas City bump. That's really it is. And I know people say it in good ways, people say it in a bad way, but it's a real thing. We saw it last year with Sky Moore. It didn't work out, but you can't say that not all Kansas City wide receivers aren't going to work out. I mean, they drafted Tyreek Hill, and he turned out to be a superstar. I think, with Andy Reid, it's never going to be one guy who's a true dominant wide receiver one. We saw last year that the targets were really, really split out between MVS, Juju, Sky Moore, even Jerick McKinnon had a ton of receptions towards the end of the year. Mecole Hardman as well. So, Rashee Rice, I do like the narrative that he played catch or he threw some routes with Patrick Mahomes prior to the draft. Patrick Mahomes thought there was a really good connection. So, again, I'm going to take my shot on a high-powered offense. You know what Patrick Mahomes is. You know he's the best quarterback in the league, and you have a very, very gifted offensive mind in Andy Reid. I'm willing to take the risk on Rashee Rice, especially since I think he's more talented than Sky Moore. He has a better catch point than Sky Moore. He's obviously bigger and more explosive. Maybe not more explosive, but he's stronger than Sky Moore. So I could see him supplanting Sky Moore on the depth chart pretty quickly. He's actually, in a lot of rookie drafts, Rashee Rice is going less than Sky Moore. Sky Moore was a kind of end of the first round, early second round pick last year. So Rashee Rice here is the 207 compared to Sky Moore. Quite the steal. Moving on. Again, mentioned this before. I love the running backs. I love their usage. I love how they fell out. Tank Bigsby does fall a little bit down to me just because I don't think he'll ever kind of get into that running back one territory. I think the most likely outcome for a Tank Bigsby is an Alexander Madison career or a Khalil Herbert career. And maybe in a couple years, or if there's lingering injury concerns with Travis Etienne, he's proven he can't really stay entirely healthy. He's been banged up. He had the Louis Frank injury, so maybe Tank Bigsby comes in as a good backup. But I really value him as a very, very high-end backup, and eventually 3 years down the line, he maybe get the opportunity to get that RB1 spot. But I'm taking Spears over him, Roschon over him, Devon Achane over him. They have much more clearer paths to being that RB1 in their respective offenses over Tank Bigsby. I just think given the investment, given the relationship Etienne has with Trevor Lawrence, and Etienne, the work rate that he had last year after they traded away James Robinson, Tank Bigsby, it's going to be a fight to be ever viewed as the RB1 in that offense. So moving on, we're going back, and like I said, we're all taking shots here. So I'm taking my shot on a guy that I personally like, and Jalen Hyatt. I know this is a very, very spicy take over Josh Downs, Mims, Reed, and the like, but again, I like Jalen Hyatt. The tape does not lie. I know people are bumping him down. He fell to the third round. Yeah, I get that. But I think he did go to the perfect landing spot. He goes to a landing spot with the New York Giants that was desperately needing an alpha wide receiver. I mean, people have talked about they have a ton of wide receivers in their wide receiver room with Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, Richie James, Darius Slayton, but these are all guys that, they proved they either don't have it anymore or they never had it in the first place and never proved to be a reliable wide receiver one. And we saw Jalen Hyatt's talent on display completely at Tennessee this past year in college football. Again, I don't think his production was entirely a result of a gimmicky offense. You can't scheme someone open like that open. It's just not possible, because if it was, every single player would do it. Everyone would be throwing to someone who has 12 yards of separation. And listen, if there's any head coach that I believe that could, utilize the speed and separation skills of Jalen Hyatt, it's Brian Daboll. I think that Jalen Hyatt has a really, really outside shot to be a dominant wide receiver one for the Giants, which isn't saying much. I mean, again, it's going to be a huge run first game up there in New York, but I do love Jalen Hyatt's ability to establish himself as the mini alpha wide receiver for the Giants. So I'm taking the shot on him here towards the end of the second round. After Jalen Hyatt, I'm going to go, just because this is a super flex draft, I'm going with Hendon Hooker. I'm willing to take the risk on him. Yes, I know all those wide receivers are still on the board, and I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but this is a super flex league, and Hendon Hooker does have a road to be a very, very successful NFL and fantasy football quarterback. Again, in the post-draft rankings, we compared him to Will Levis, how they're both going to be probably sitting for a year. But once they come out of that year, I mean, you have one of the brightest offensive minds in Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Lions. You have so many weapons around Hendon Hooker to make him successful. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Jamison Williams when he gets back from suspension, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, I just think the situation up there, and also being in the easier NFC East conference, that should certainly something we should take into consideration. I think Hendon Hooker is really primed for success. If you take him at the end of the second round, definitely a guy that you want to sit on, put him on your taxi. Don't freak out after the first year, but a guy that, you're buying the dip on some stock, and then he might be able to skyrocket year 2, year 3. So you have to kind of wait and make that investment on Hendon Hooker. But I do like the situation that he was drafted into, even if he was a third round quarterback that generally doesn't produce a high hit rate. Here at the 211, we're going to go with a tight end, because it's time to stop ignoring the tight ends. Sam Laporta. Listen, I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for putting Sam Laporta this far down. I don't truly believe in the mantra that, a high-end tight end is a true positional value, a positional advantage. I think loading up, especially when you have a super flex, especially in Dynasty where you have these really large rosters where you're rostering, or you're starting 3 wide receivers, at least 2 running backs, 2 quarterbacks. I think most teams still subscribe to the methodology that there is only one tight end that you have to start, which really, really devalues the tight end position. Really, all you have to do is have a competent starting tight end and then just really invest at those other high value positions. Sam Laporta, though, he had the draft capital. He has the round 2. Clearly another guy that Detroit Lions went out and got. Similar vein to Jahmyr Gibbs, where listen, they targeted this guy. They have a plan for him in their offense. They really want to utilize him. He's taken over Michael Mayer, so they clearly value him to some degree. I mean, Iowa tight ends in that Lions offense is nothing new. They had TJ Hawkinson, so I think they will be utilizing him. With so many offensive weapons to go around, I think Sam Laporta's ceiling is capped. And again, he won't be a true, Y tight end or X. I forget what type of term it is, but like what Dalton Kincaid's going to be just solely a pass catcher. I think he's going to be truly taking on that all-around tight end role. He is pretty gritty. He, the classic brings his lunch pail to work kind of mantra, or just a hard worker. And he'll be a better NFL player than he is a fantasy football player. So after that, we'll go to the 212, and we're going to see finally a run of 3 wide receivers. We're going to pick up the pace here. This video is going on, so pick up the pace. We're going to do 3 wide receivers here. We're going to do, and really, I think these guys can go in any order. It's just what's your flavor. But Jaden Reed, then I'm going to do Marvin Mims, and then I'm going to do Josh Downs. Again, day 2 draft capital, not the greatest situations. For a multitude of reasons. Jaden Reed, you're already coming into a situation where there's an unknown at quarterback in Jordan Love. He's only played a handful of snaps. You don't know if he's the long-term future of the franchise, or if they're going to move on and try to get a Drake May or Caleb Williams next year, or even try to go for an upside shot on like a Quinn Ewers. I think they have the draft capital, the round 2 draft capital, but Christian Watson seems to be their alpha wide receiver, so I don't think there's ever a path to him being the wide receiver 1. Marvin Mims, again, I'm willing to move him up if the Broncos move on from Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, but right now I can see him being the wide receiver 3 at best, and I just don't think in that Sean Payton offense that's going to get a lot of play or a lot of traction. So, again, a guy that you're going to have to hold on to for quite a long time before he ever develops. And Josh Downs, just the inconsistency scares me of the offense that's going to be built around Anthony Richardson. It's going to be a very run-first offense. And we saw how dominant the offense was off of the potential of Justin Fields was last year. But the wide receiver weapons weren't really that good, especially the secondary wide receiver options. Michael Pittman is still the wide receiver 1, still the main target of that offense. Josh Downs, really, he's a speedster. He's short. He's an outlier as far as it comes to height and size and weight for the wide receiver position. And I think he's mostly going to use to take the top off of defense and kind of occupy some of the safeties and nickel cornerbacks while they open up running lanes for either Jonathan Taylor or Anthony Richardson. I think, he turns into Joshua Palmer type, 1 to 2 targets per game. Maybe he has a blow-up game with 2 touchdowns, but it's going to be very, very few and far between. I just don't love the consistency that Josh Downs offers. Again, another guy that you're going to have to, hold on for a while to see if Anthony Richardson does develop as a passer and Josh Downs can develop as a wide receiver. So after that run of 3 guys, we're going to go back to the running back well here. Chase Brown, again, my next running back up, just because, at some point there's been a ton of rumors with the Bengals cutting Joe Mixon. Chris Evans obviously is not the long-term plan there in the Bengals. They've tried that the past 2 seasons and it just really hasn't worked out. So Chase Brown, even with the 5th round draft capital, I like what he did at Syracuse and genuinely should be the next back up, especially if they cut Mixon. He is going to, skyrocket up draft boards. Again, if you're doing your draft before June 1st cut dates, definitely a guy that is of value here in the 3rd round, because if you get to your drafts and they're post June 1 cut and June 1 cut and the Bengals move on from Joe Mixon, Chase Brown will be really up around this range here at the back end of the 2nd round. So I love taking the risk love taking the upside shot on Chase Brown here. I do want to mention though that Chase Brown, if you do draft him here, you better be a competing team. Or trade, if you want to trade for him after, Joe Mixon gets cut and you're willing to pay that premium on him, you need to be a competing team, because with the round 5 draft capital, it is very likely that the Bengals will go out and replace him next year. So Chase Brown, either you're taking him and trying to use him to compete this year, or you're taking him and trying to sell him before he gets replaced next year. After Chase Brown, we're going to go with Luke Musgraves. Again, the tight end that I like coming out of Green Bay. There was not quite a ton of footage of him this past year. He was very injured, but the games that he did play, he was so freaking athletic and so freaking productive. I think he's the guy that's going to be the true pass catcher for this Green Bay offense. Again, they have a massive hole at tight end with, Josiah DeGuara being the only tight end on the depth chart prior to the draft. They did spend capital on Luke Musgraves as well as Tucker Kraft. But with Luke Musgrave, I just have this feeling that he is going to be the pass catcher and the guy that goes out and fulfills that, wide receiver role instead of Tucker Kraft, where, Tucker Kraft is this guy. The bring your lunch pail to work guy, going to get in the trenches, going to be a blocker, going to be an all-around tight end guy. Luke Musgraves is going to be the pass catcher, and some of the catches he made when he was healthy last year at Oregon State were absolutely ridiculous. At the 305, after Luke Musgraves, we're going to go with Cedric Tillman. I'm not entirely sold on his landing spot. This is a guy that I was really sold on prior to the draft, a guy that I thought might creep into the high 2nd round. Definitely not a 1st round player. I know some people had him going in the 1st round. No, it was never going to happen with his injury this past year. But look back at his 2021 season. This dude is a freak of an athlete. He is just so dominant. And again, his bad numbers this year were really based on poor play, rushing back from the injury. And I don't think he was really fully healed. I think a lot of people are going to be shocked about how athletic and how good he is as a wide receiver when he comes on to the Browns. I just, again, don't trust the Browns organization. I don't think that, they've made smart moves. The Deshaun Watson, he hasn't proved it to me yet. He came back on the field. He had 1 good game. I need to see it before I believe it. In the 3rd round here, even around here, if you don't like the Josh Downs or the Chase Brown or the Marvin Mims, I'm fine with taking Cedric Tillman here at the top of the 3rd round. I think he's a good flyer, but just based on his landing spot in Cleveland alone, he could be, the long-term wide receiver 2, beating out Donovan Peoples-Jones and David Bell to slot in right behind Amari Cooper. But again, dysfunctional organizations I don't really like. So that's why Cedric Tillman falls here for me. Don't have to berate that into the ground. Everyone knows what the Browns organization is. After Cedric Tillman, again, we're going to go with a tight end, not Darnell Washington. We're going to go with Luke Schoonmaker. Again, we love the landing spot. We love the round 2 draft capital for Luke Schoonmaker. And this is a Dallas offense that, Dak loves his tight ends. We saw how productive Dalton Schultz was when he was healthy and on the field. I think Luke Schoonmaker, given the investment from the Cowboys in the second round, given how that offense likes to be run through the tight end and how Dak uses the tight end quite a bit as that safety blanket, as that third round pass catcher, move the sticks type ball player or playmaker is what I was trying to say there. Gosh, this video is going on for a long time. Words are starting to get hard, but Luke Schoonmaker, again, Dallas tight end. I like him there. Better upside than any of the rest of these picks that we have afterwards. After Schoonmaker, we're going to go to a running back. Again, trying to bet on path to the field here, and that's going to be Zach Evans. Cam Akers, I know a lot of people liked him. He had a really, really strong finish to the season last year, but he was almost traded away. He was almost cut by the Rams last year. I might not be in the best relationship with Sean McVay. So with Darrell Henderson out of Los Angeles being released towards the end of last year, Cam Akers, you never know. There could be a flip of the switch, and Sean McVay could move on from him. He could fumble. He could have an issue. And Zach Evans could definitely be the next man up. In a very weapon-depleted Los Angeles Rams system, Zach Evans is a guy that here in the middle of the third round, why not take that upside shot on him? Moving on, after Zach Evans, we'll be going to Izzy Abanikanda. Again, at this point, when we're talking about late round running backs, just the way that historically their hit rates are much higher than late round wide receivers. So we're going to keep the train running on late round running backs, and Izzy Abanikanda to the New York Jets is going to be my pick here at the 308. He jumps in immediately, I think, as a backup running back to Breece Hall. And obviously Breece Hall's question coming back from that ACL injury is still, Breece Hall's health coming back from the ACL injury is still quite a bit in question at this point. So Izzy Abanikanda, I think, has a great backup role. We saw other backs, whether it was Donovan Knight, whether it was Michael Carter, also have a little bit of play behind Breece Hall, even when he's on the field. This is a coaching staff with Robert Saleh that's come from a very run-dominant scheme from Kyle Shanahan. They do love their running backs, and I think if Izzy can make his way above Michael Carter and Donovan Knight, that he will have certainly a lot of play behind Breece Hall, especially as Breece Hall definitely gets his legs back underneath him from that injury. All right, at the 309 here, we are going to go with... Where is this guy? We're going to go with Tank Dell. Again, it's going to be a combination here of round 3 draft capital, very top end of round 3. So he has better draft capital than basically any other player left on the board. Plus, he's in a very wide receiver depleted room. You have John Mechie coming back from leukemia. You have Robert Woods, who basically was, a ghost haunting the wide receiver room of the Tennessee Titans last year. But Tank Dell, I don't think they're going to be really that impediment if I'm getting involved. I think he's a very dynamic wide receiver despite his limitations when it comes to his height. If he's a Rondale Moore type player, I think here at the 309, you couldn't be happier. Moving on after this, at the 310, let's see. We're going to do some wide receivers here. Just a little bit of run on my wide receivers. Michael Wilson. I like him a little bit more than the rest of the wide receivers left on the board just because, he's a long-term play for the Arizona Cardinals. Rondale Moore's contract is coming up at the end of next season. So is DeAndre Hopkins' contract. DeAndre Hopkins for sure will not be back. He might even be moved off of the Cardinals roster this season. So with Michael Wilson being there, if he can come in and be a wide receiver 2 behind Marquise Brown, or if Marquise Brown wants to play primarily out of the slot, while Michael Wilson takes that outside wide receiver role, especially if they, when they get Kyler Murray back next year, or if they drafted Caleb Williams or Drake May, I think Michael Wilson, could have some upside as a long-term play. He's definitely a taxi guy for the 2023 season. Next, we'll go on to Kayshon Boutte. He had flashes of greatness at LSU. Obviously, this past year is pretty dismal. He had one or two good catches, and obviously the lack of effort was something that's really concerned. He could genuinely be cut by the New England Patriots before the start of the season if he does show that lack of effort in training camp. But at this point, you're really taking very, very low percentage dart throws, like 5% chances of guys becoming fantasy relevant players. Kayshon Boutte, just given his hype before last season, maybe he finds a way to reclaim it in the NFL. So take a shot at here at the end of the third round. After Kayshon, we're going to go with another running back, a guy that this will be easier if we just go to the running backs. Dwayne McBride. I like him quite a bit. Same vein as Chase Brown, where, there's been a lot of rumors with Dalvin Cook being traded or Dalvin Cook being released if he doesn't negotiate a pay cut. And obviously Alexander Madison there, he got a contract extension, but with Dre McBride coming in to be a high-end tight end or a high-end running back one, and maybe after the contract extension for Alexander Madison runs out, Dwayne McBride can be there. He's obviously a very dynamic runner for UAB, so I think he's a very talented running back, even though he was a 7th-round draft pick. So obviously, if they do move on from Dalvin Cook post June 1, Dwayne McBride's value will skyrocket quite a bit, but this is where you take the shot on potentially some roster moves, bumping up the value of these players. Moving down to the 4th round. After Dwayne McBride, we are going to go to Sean Tucker. Again, another running back, a lot of questions, tons of injury concerns. A heart issue caused him to not be drafted, but, a guy that was thought of as a 1st-round draft, rookie draft pick prior to the season. He's a track star. He is dominant when it comes to speed. He's very quick. He has great hands, had great production at Syracuse, and frankly, he goes to a backfield that currently in Tampa Bay is very, very lonely with just Rachaad White ahead of him. So the path to the field, pretty palpable for Sean Tucker. So I like the upside shot here on Sean Tucker here in the 4th round. Moving on, after Sean Tucker, we're going with some quarterbacks, because why not? After Sean Tucker, I really, really don't like many of the players, so I'm going to go with some quarterbacks. Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I've already expressed my displeasure on what Deshaun Watson produced as a quarterback last year. And Dorian Thompson-Robinson is a guy that was a pre-draft darling for me. He's a 5-year starter at UCLA, has the maturity. He got better year over year, very similar to a Jalen Hurts, who had a better PFF passing grade year over year. So a guy that I think can come in. He's not even as old as a Hendon Hooker, but can still, has a lot of maturity when it comes to taking the field. He is a high-end backup. I think if you get a Tyler Huntley-esque career out of Dorian Thompson-Robinson, that's honestly a great pick for a 4th round. But, he has a very, very long shot to see the field if Deshaun Watson continues to struggle. And Dorian Thompson-Robinson, shows the ability he had at UCLA to, competently manage an offense as a game manager. And he does have that rushing ability that you like from a quarterback, and he also has quite the cannon of an arm if he can just, work on his accuracy. Not saying Cleveland's in a position to actually help fix that, but it's there. Next quarterback is a guy that I really, really, really don't like in Stetson Bennett. Again, the Los Angeles Rams absolutely cleaned house. They think they signed the most number of undrafted free agents and rookies after the draft. They had 14 draft picks. So again, this is a team that just has nothing. And as far as their quarterback room, they've let everyone go except for Matthew Stafford, who still currently is not throwing based on his injury. So if the injury bugs that's, always followed Matthew Stafford around, Stetson Bennett could be on the field. He's a high caliber backup quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams, and in SuperFlex, that can be very, very valuable in the 4th round. After Stetson Bennett, we're going to go to a guy that I really, really like, and I've been picking up in basically all of my rookie drafts, and that's Xavier Hutchinson. I think this dude is immensely talented, and he goes, same thing we talked about with Tank Dell. He's a guy that he's going to a Texans wide receiver room that's pretty pathetic, with the shell of Robert Woods, with John Mechie coming back from cancer. Nico Collins, not really sold on him. He's had a few years in the NFL, hasn't really shown to be that true dominant wide receiver. And I think with Tank Dell. He's a tremendous talent, but he's too small to play that wide receiver X on the outside and that on that boundary. So this is where Xavier Hutchinson can come in. He can come in and take over that Nico Collins role, or maybe Nico Collins can be that deep threat. Xavier Hutchinson can play on the wide, and then Tank Dell can play in the slot, and I think he should get plenty of usage, especially coming in with CJ Stroud. Again, in the 4th round, definitely, the landing spot boosts Xavier Hutchinson in the 4th round here. Moving on, we're going to go with Brenton Strange as the tight end, and frankly, I like to bet on good offenses. Jacksonville is certainly a good offense. They, have one of the brightest young quarterbacks in the game in Trevor Lawrence. And they brought back Evan Ingram on the franchise tag. They could extend him or they could let him go. Could be a very similar situation to Dalton Schultz. So I think most likely they let Evan Ingram walk and Brenton Strange becomes their tight end of the future, unless they go back and, redraft another tight end next year. But I don't think that's the case given the draft capital they invested in Brenton Strange. So again, a tight end that you could look at maybe developing 1 or 2 years down the line. After Brenton Strange, we're going to go with Deuce Vaughn, the smallest player ever recorded at the NFL Combine or in the NFL draft process. The dude is just productive, and I like what he brings to the field. He had back-to-back 1,300-yard seasons for Kansas State. Yes, he's small, but it's not like we haven't seen small backs produce. Just look at, why can't I think of his name? The Darren Sproles. Darren Sproles for the Eagles. Deuce Vaughn can come in, and also, Tony Pollard, Deuce Vaughn was the only other running back that they drafted. Yes, Dallas could re-sign Zeke. They could bring in a Kareem Hunt or another running back, but right now, he is a pathway behind Malik Davis as the running back 3, and he could be out there for some snaps. So why not? If they find a way to use him productively in this offense, if it is a high-powered offense that Jerry and the rest of the brass over in Dallas says it is, why not take that shot on him? After Deuce Vaughn, we're going to go with a guy that I was pretty high on pre-draft. However, his landing spot left me a little bit disappointed. There's just it's really, really crowded wide receiver room there in Jacksonville, but I love the talent that Parker Washington provide. I got another Penn State wide receiver that has really, really soft hands and can really come out and plays the position well. He comps himself to Deebo Samuel, and anytime, it's a marriage with Doug Peterson, who loves to run the ball, and you have a guy like this who's feisty and is willing to take the ball out of the backfield. I think he might be able to get in some usage. If Calvin Ridley, his year and a half away from the game leaves him a little battered and bruised or a little bit out of touch like Deshaun Watson was. If Zay Jones doesn't keep up his monumental pace from the end of last season. Right now, Parker Washington is behind Zay, Christian Kirk, and Calvin Ridley, but there's a pathway to him being a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2, a good desperation flex start, and just a guy that, I like the talent of him, so I'll bet on the talent. After that, we have another wide receiver 3 in A.T. Perry going to the Saints, a guy that I think kind of a lot of people are going to say it was a crime that he fell to the 6th round of drafts. A lot of people loved his talent as one of the true, a lot of this really undersized wide receiver class. A.T. Perry is one of the bigger, more athletic guys that tested at the Combine, had really good testing numbers, obviously 6'4", really jumped out of the gym. And, if Michael Thomas comes on, it seems like they restructured his deal, but they're also restructuring in a way that they can move on from him pretty shortly. Rashid Shaheed is a good wide receiver too, but I think A.T. Perry does have the talent to leapfrog him. Chris Olave is obviously Chris Olave, but if you're getting a potential wide receiver 2 in the Saints offense in the 4th round, definitely take your shot on A.T. Perry. Right here, we're going to go with Eric Gray and Evan Hull, 2 of these backup running backs. Either order, whichever one you fancy. Obviously, I put Eric Gray here a little bit. I have him ranked a little bit higher than Evan Hull just because, Saquon Barkley, currently on the franchise tag, could be gone after this year. Eric Gray could step up at least for a little bit, but most likely the Giants would probably draft someone to replace him. But at this point, Eric Gray, if something happens, if Saquon rediscovers his injury bug, he could definitely see some playing time. Evan Hull, a little bit less path to the field with the youth and more stability and healthiness that Jonathan Taylor has. Also, it's a running offense with Anthony Richardson. But, if something does manage to happen to Jonathan Taylor, they did ship off Nyheim Hines, and I don't think Zach Moss is going to be in their future plans. Pretty sure they cut him. So Evan Hull, decent mid-level backup running back. Now we're going to jump to our last 2 picks here. Right here is going to be one of the tight ends I've mentioned in my rankings is going to be Zach Kuntz. Tight end for the Jets. Again, a Jets offense that really has been looking for their tight end of the future. They whiffed on Irv Smith. They whiffed on CJ Uzama. And Zach Kuntz is just an athletic freak. I think he could come in and, be on the field. Similar to Michael Mayer, he's going to get a lot of opportunity just because he does. He's a great all-around tight end. And with Aaron Rodgers does like his tight ends. He does love that fade route to the back of the end zone for the tight ends. So that's why we saw a lot of Robert Tonyan. His big game was 3 touchdowns and 34 yards. So again, he could be a great red zone target for Aaron Rodgers. And if you're getting a red zone target, he's getting 2 catches and a touchdown. That's all you really want from your tight end, and that's a great value here. And lastly, I want to round it out with a fun pick. Malik Cunningham, undrafted UDFA quarterback for the... Do we even have him here? Yes, there he is. Malik Cunningham, UDFA for New England. I mean, I think we saw the relationship between Bill Belichick and Mac Jones sour a little bit last year. And Bill Belichick has always just been very enamored with these dual threat quarterbacks. Obviously, he signed Cam Newton. He was very interested in Lamar Jackson. He's commented on Lamar Jackson quite a bit, even before Lamar Jackson hit the open market, quote unquote, this past offseason. So Bill Belichick he's just always really been enamored with a guy that has the tools that Malik Cunningham has. And I think he could be rising up that depth chart sooner rather than later. And we'll see if he does, he has a great work ethic. He fits really well with that New England Patriots system. So why not, dude? In the 410, take a fun pick. Malik Cunningham is my fun pick as my last quarterback to take in this draft. So that's it. That is all 48 picks, me talking for an ungodly amount of time. But yeah, let me know what you think of this draft. Hopefully I explained it well enough, kind of combining my rankings versus public, versus the consensus public opinion on where these guys should fall, and really who you should be targeting in what areas. And if you may be targeting a certain guy that I listed here, try to rearrange your draft capital. If you like Roshan, then trade back. If you have the 201 like Roshan, trade back. Try to get him. I love how Roshan's always been my go-to when talking about a guy that I value highly, but I'm going to trade back for, because that's what I've literally done in every single league. So hope you guys enjoyed SuperFlex Mock Draft. The single quarterback mock draft will be coming out next week, and some other fun content coming out the rest of these weeks. We're going to be shortening it down to 2 videos a week for the foreseeable future in the off season. So just a little less workload on my plate, but until next time, take care.